the due diligence part that I probably would never make that same mistake again is, do you know where the corporate company is going? Do you know where the big company is headed? And what does that look like? And what are some of the things that go into that? Like how does that affect you, little small owner down here at the end of the food chain? Um, some of the, struggles probably are not knowing what that looked like. And would
Mm.
I have made the same decisions knowing what I know now? I'm not sure. Like,
Welcome to the Tracer Podcast, your inside track to all things franchising. We provide essential resources for anyone in the franchising world. Let's get into it.
All right. Welcome back to another episode of the Tracer Franchising Podcast. Today, I've got Scott on the episode with me. He's a multi-unit franchise owner. We're going to keep things kind of generic here, and we're going to hear from him about how things were as an owner and what lessons learned from people like yourself, likely if you're listening to this, things that you should know when you start looking into a franchise. So I'm excited to get into this. Scott, good to have you.
thanks, Josh. Appreciate it. Looking forward to the conversation.
Okay, perfect. So let's start off with just about you. Like, what was your background before you even started looking at owning a business?
So big picture, retired Air Force, 32 years, mostly in operations, C-17 transport pilot, and then leadership track the latter part of my career. Started as a young private in the Army Guard a long time ago, retired after going to the Air Force Academy, rising to the ranks. Very, very grateful for the military career and all that, all the people I got to work with and serve with, and kind of all the great lessons learned. The day I retired, next day I went right into an executive role as um, the chief experience officer in a mid-sized credit union. Was a great experience to kind of move laterally from running a base to running operations and retail for a credit union. A tremendous amount about, P&Ls and commercial space and dealing with the other side of the folks that we served in the military, obviously our whole lives. So it was a great experience, great leadership opportunity. Had some amazing folks work with me, for me, with me, around me. Taught me a lot of great lessons learned, but pretty much the drive to own my own business was always there. I was that kid that had paper routes and car washes and was always looking to make money and learn new things. And my dad was a sole proprietor of a small business. And at the time, my father-in-law owned his own business. So it was in and around me. And I kind of always had the knack for it. But I think the Air Force kind of kept me busy and kept those juices satisfied for 32 years. And then when I got out, I realized they were still there and ready to be developed. So kind of took me to the path, midlife. How do you get in the small business world? Obviously, lots of pros and cons of franchising. Had I had more time and maybe younger, it might not have been as attractive. But I think depending on where you are in your life stream journey, I think getting on with the right franchise and gives you a jump start to being able to get further down the road of developing and creating a viable entity called a small business. So I think that answers most of the question.
Yeah, I didn't realize you started off enlisted. That's really cool.
Like I said, God is good and been blessed with a lot of great opportunities and great people and folks pulling me along and supporting me, and wouldn't change it for all the money in the world.
Very cool. So you actually hit on something that was like my next question, right? So you hinted towards why you went the franchising route instead of buying a business or starting a business. Can you kind of dive a little bit deeper into why you chose franchising and who you think franchising is a good fit for?
Yeah. So obviously, I did a lot of research, had looked at several concepts, had been in the pipeline for a fairly large, very lucrative food chain that deals in chicken. And I always thought that's kind of where I was going. I didn't realize making the cut to get into that pipeline was difficult, but even more difficult to get out of the pool and actually match. What I liked about the concept of any franchise, and they all have it, they have a operations manual and a playbook and a lot of the things that typically are the early struggles to starting a business from ground zero, right? You've got networks, you've got systems, you've got playbooks, operations manuals, more or most of the better franchise companies provide a lot of really good support and really help somebody transition from somewhere they've never been, owning a business, to somewhat being successful. So for me personally, as I mentioned previously, I was a career operator. I flew airplanes, we ran operations all around the world, et cetera, et cetera. But we always had manuals to dictate a lot of what we were doing. There's always that space for free thought and ingenuity and being able to solve problems, but always having a foundational document to start from seemed to provide greater success for the people that were kind of involved with that. So fundamentally, I think the concept is absolutely applicable to the world of franchising, because you are buying a playbook. And most guys, if they start from zero, they learn so many lessons in those first couple of years. If they survive those first couple of years, the likelihood of surviving with a franchise just goes up because they've given you 60, 70, maybe 80% of the solutions before you ever open the door or flip the switch. So fundamentally, I think that's really like the huge benefit of buying either, a franchise or even an existing business that's well documented, that has processes and procedures in place, because for any of us, military or not, it's all new. And for the veterans on the line, it is, or it makes your life a little bit easier to be able to fall into something that already has a starting structure, and there's plenty to learn on your own. There's plenty of decisions that have to be made in the other space. But man, having that foundational core starting point with ops manuals and systems and support really go a long way to hopefully getting you started faster, quicker, and getting you to a place where you can be profitable sooner.
Yeah, yeah, and I always use the analogy of a bridge that's like 90% complete, right? Because when you start a business, it is like this big canyon between you and it becoming profitable. And a lot of people get hung up on, you know, the logo, the marketing, the actual product, how many products am I going to sell or how many services am I going to offer? Um, what's the perfect customer type? Am I going to go Facebook? Am I going to go Google? Am I going to go networking? Right? There's like a million decisions. Whereas a franchise, they're like, this is what you do, but they need somebody who can go out and can get shit done. Right? That's what a franchise that's what their job is basically. Right? At least the first couple years, and that's why I think vets are great at this because that's kind of what they've been told to do. And there's ambiguous decision making points like yeah, nobody can make that for you because it's unique to you and your time and location. But that bridge is 80 or 90% of the way built. So cool.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point, and just to like reiterate, the most franchise agreements are pretty specific as to delineating a lot of the responsibilities on the owner, right? So, for the folks that haven't done any homework in this subject area yet, you're not getting all the answers. They're giving you a framework. They're giving you some processes, some connections, some systems. You get to choose which you pick and choose. You pick what vendors you want to use. You pick, like hiring and pay. And, that's the part that is hard to like truly articulate, because until you've done it, you don't really understand how much the franchise contributes until your hair's on fire that first 6 months and you got people coming and going and you're hiring and the phones are ringing and you got cash flow you got to worry about. You got to pay bills and payroll, and you're like, man, I don't think I could have done it without the starting point that was the system I bought, and that's why, whether you agree or disagree with the selection or the actual company you choose, franchise, or the reality is if you find the right one that fits your needs, wants, and desires in life out of your small business, it provides a lot of that starting point. But for the veterans in the room, like I've said this 1,000 times over, don't be intimidated. The skill set to fill what's left at the end of that pie really fits nicely with just about any rank or any veteran that comes into the world of franchising and buys a business, because it's leadership, it's decision making, it's risk mitigation, it's all the things that just about anyone who's served pretty much any time. But to me, I'm a little bit biased because I think since 9/11, we've created some of the world's best decision makers, veterans that, have just performed beyond where anyone in the military could have ever expected. Guess what? Those are all the skills that are going to make you successful as a small business owner. And when I give you a playbook to give you a little bit of a leading edge or, a running start, it makes it that much easier.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's such a good point. I think like a lot of these guys, when I got out and then, talking to my leaders from back in the day and like, oh, I don't know, like, what am I going to do when I get out? You could do anything, guys. You're so capable. You're so capable of doing stuff that you just don't even realize it. And then the other thing I did want to note is that like some franchises in terms of the control are much higher than others, right? So like I've seen some where people are like, I'm basically a sales gun, right? But I don't want to do anything else other than sell. So I want to know what vendors to use. I don't want to actually deliver the product. I just want to be told what's the thing that I'm selling, and then like let me go, and do it. And then I've seen some where it's like, here's a rough framework, and we're here if you have questions, but like do kind of what you want. So most of them are somewhere in between those two extremes. But yeah, there's something out there if you, depending on which way you kind of lean as well. And I think that's important for, you don't want to be a guy who wants a lot of control and you're in an overly strict franchise or vice versa.
Right. And truly that's, and you as a guy that helps match people, it's so important. It's not just like, I want to be a franchise owner. It's like, okay, what are your goals? Family goals, time goals, investment goals. There's this calculus that goes into this big equation, and the likelihood that you didn't even know, like you can do all those things. And here's the 2 or 3 industries or franchise models you want to look at, very hands-on, not hands-on, absentee, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't know if I really knew that in my due diligence. Uh, I had a different goal, obviously, coming out of the world of executing as a credit union guy, but that's the education piece. And that's why, what you're doing with your podcast and trying to educate people is so important. And I think you heard this at SAC the first time we met, like our model for transitioning veterans is so broken because it's 2 things. It's, be a civilian or be a government contractor / government employee, right? In a different uniform. Nowhere in there do we ever talk about this thing called small business ownership in any form, whether it's franchise, startup, etc. And I personally think it's a huge discredit because it really needs to be a third, a third, a third. Because, so many people, unfortunately, really don't understand what it is to be a business owner. They don't understand, and you were there, like we always ask the question, show of hands, how much money do you think it costs to buy a franchise? And $1 million, $5 million, like all these crazy numbers. And you're like, dude, I bought a franchise for $15,000. What? What do you mean $15,000? Like, you need a small business loan. At that time, it was $150,000 SBA. You needed to have 10% up, and the rest is in the form of a loan. And like just the ease of entry, the access. Unfortunately, again, going back to my disconnect with, the transition programs that all services do, it's like it's lacking. And it's unfortunate because so many folks deserve the opportunity to build a better life when they get out. And for those that go on to be successful in the small business world, and it's challenging, it's not easy. There is a high failure rate. I get all those things, but veterans tend to succeed. They tend to figure it out and they tend to do really well in this space. So why not educate them well enough that they can make a educated or an educated decision, commercial or civilian life, government employee, contractor, or this thing called small business ownership.
Yeah, for sure. And I remember, so the SAC, for those listening, it's a career conference for bets. And like the companies, it was like JP Morgan, Verizon, like these huge companies. And I'm talking to these guys and I'm like, if I wanted to go back and be, a cog in this giant machine, I would have stayed active duty in the Marine Corps because I was doing way cooler stuff, right? Than like punching in stuff into a computer. I think people who have that mindset and they're just resigned to like, I guess this is what I have to do now, right? There is like, you're basically a company commander. It feels like when you're a small business owner in a franchise, because you've got higher up that's supporting you and helping you and giving you the SOPs and looking forward. And then you have your team, and you're, maybe at the beginning you're like in the weeds. So maybe you're more like a squad leader, right? But it's not that hard to get to a point where you are putting managers in place and you're like checking in and you're making sure the battle rhythm's right and you're looking outward. And I think for people who get out at company command or like around there, they're just like, oh, I don't want to be staff. It's like, dude, JP Morgan's not for you, man. Maybe a franchise is.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk now about some of the challenges because you grew to a multi-million-dollar business in a relatively short amount of time. I think by any measure, people would have been impressed by those numbers. And can you just talk us through like what was because there's franchisees in the same businesses that will never get to that size, right? So like, what were the things that you did that enabled you to grow as quickly as you did?
Yeah. So full disclosure, full caveat, right? I'm a retired colonel with 28 years. So being in a position where the food in the house was always paid for definitely gives you a little more flexibility in your decision making, call it risk taking, call it expansion minded growth, right? So I think it's really important for people to understand that. Like I was using money being generated from the first investment to expand into the second and third investments. So at that point, it was no longer me using, I guess it could have been my money. I could have a lot more in the bank today if I didn't do that, but it's that balance. But the beauty of being in the right company and finding the right fit for you, if you have certain dollar values or goals, revenue, et cetera, whatever that matrix is, find the company that's going to allow you to do that. Because not all companies do that. Right. So I think in my particular case, it's easy for somebody to approve an additional territory or an additional concept when they know Scott's family is being fed, the roof is over their head. So that's important to know, like full disclosure. It's a little bit easier when you have a steady income behind the scenes while you're doing all these things. So caveat number one. Caveat number two is I left somewhat lucrative world of being an exec in a $2 billion credit union. So I kind of had some ideas and some resources that I was willing to commit to it, right? Because of the fact that I had stability over here with a steady paycheck. The third thing though was finding the concept that gives you those opportunities. Like, and for a long time, I was doing due diligence calls for a couple of the brands. And the challenge was always like, hey, Josh, you realize you're buying 3 zip codes inside of this territory and there's owners all around you. Josh, what's your goal? Well, my goal is to be a bazillion-dollar owner and I'm going to blow it up and be the best XYZ. Is like, dude, you just bought 3 zip codes. There's nowhere to go. That, fundamentally part of that due diligence, going back to you have to have really good goals and clearly established mindset of what you want. I personally had some pretty audacious goals. That's three things into my franchising discussion and how I get to grow. And again, you got to be in the business that matches your needs and desires. And you have to kind of know what the long-term plan of that particular system you're buying into. And that's kind of what allowed me to get from 3 to equivalent of 9 units today in 5 years.
Awesome. So to sum up, I think that the first question, right? What did it sound like? It was cash flow, right? So personal cash flow as well as business cash flow, right? So you had a retirement Whereas someone might have a spouse, or they don't have any cash flow, but they've saved up a certain amount, or you can even in an SBA loan write in a modest salary, like what a normal manager would be making, right? But you need to make sure that you're not going hungry while you're building up this business, right? So I think that's one. Two is ambition, right? You said, hey, I was a colonel, I came from this world, I knew my worth, and if I couldn't make whatever that dollar number was, I'm not doing this, right? And then you took whatever that was and you found a system and the territory availability around you that will allow you to get to that, right? Does that sound about right?
Yeah. Again, going back to that, you got to know, you got to do your self-assessment, your audit, kind of put all the things that you're looking for when you're sitting down with Josh to help find, your next career path. So yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Yep. And I do have a workbook to go through all that stuff, right? And do an interview to make sure we got it. Okay, cool. So when you were growing and scaling, right? What were your biggest challenges that you faced, and kind of how did you overcome them? Was it like calling on the franchisor, or was it calling on your past leadership experience? Like what did that look like?
Yeah. So for the veterans in the room, there is nuanced difference between people's motivations in the world of trades versus who we work with in the military. It's my favorite thing. When people say, well, do you miss the military? I'm like, no, I don't miss 24/7 ops my whole life. I do miss the people. And on the flip side, now it's like, that was a big transition for me. And I, to this day, like it took me about a year. I'm like, dude, I've built teams. We've been successful. We fly all around the world. I pick up a whole new crew every time I load the airplane, and we're always, successful at pushing the mission, hacking the mission, getting it done on time and safe, and all these things. I'm like, oh, I should be able to build teams. This should be easy, and it wasn't. It's not. There's no instinctive connection like we had in the military. Like when people raise their right hand to defend the Constitution, you've automatically created a culture that starts up here, and there's a certain level of commitment, whether you're 100% committed or not. The reality is Josh and I are going to go in the battle, and whether he doesn't like wearing a uniform, he's going to die the same day I die, or he's going to shoot and save us the same way I'm going to do it. And in the civilian world, it just was uniquely different. Like I struggled for like that first year, like, come on guys, kumbaya, let's rally, and let's do something fun. Oh yeah, we don't want to do it. Hey, let's work a little late tonight so we can get this job done. Yeah, I ain't working late, blah, blah, blah. Like just little nuanced things. And the outcome of it was I just had to learn that. I had to be more mindful and respectful of this space because of the franchise, the home services that I got into. Didn't really have it at the credit union because my 14 direct reports were all vice presidents and AVPs. So a little bit different motivation. So that was definitely one. Cash flow, cash flow, cash flow. No matter how much you plan and project and, you try to stay on top of it, the bottom line is stuff is going to happen and you just don't want to get ahead of your skis. So probably in the 5 or 6 years, I've probably been over the tips a couple times and been, on life support a couple of times trying to manage, oh my God, so-and-so didn't pay, or, hey, that job fell through, and oh my God, this went awry or whatever. So cash flow is always a big deal. Let's see, growth, being deliberate about it, making sure you get a clear path. The other one that it's interesting how we barely even talk about it anymore is COVID was huge, right? So
Mm,
COVID occurred within a year, my first full year in business, and the majority of owners went negative, like had down years. I was able to maintain the level, which was as good as being ahead considering the circumstances, but nobody could ever plan on that, and to this day, I don't know if the PhDs would agree that was a black swan. Like nobody could ever foresee something as, devastating as COVID, and then government interceding with operations of businesses and directing what you could and couldn't do and how you could run your business, et cetera, et cetera. So COVID definitely was a huge lesson learned. Today, one of the key lessons learned, and do your due diligence. The challenge that, and I think I fell into the same trap that 99.9% of the folks that think of due diligence as a look back. What's the performance of the businesses? How successful have they been? Build a P&L, projections, et cetera, right? And that's probably okay until it's not. And then the due diligence part that I probably would never make that same mistake again is, do you know where the corporate company is going? Do you know where the big company is headed? And what does that look like? And what are some of the things that go into that? Like how does that affect you, little small owner down here at the end of the food chain? Um, some of the, struggles probably are not knowing what that looked like. And would I have made the same decisions knowing what I know now? I'm not sure. Like that's, I'm a firm believer. You make a decision, you move on. You can't really dwell on it. I can't undo the past, but I would definitely going forward and ask you and anyone watching this is like, dude, it's one thing to look at a successful franchisor and understand their solvency and their numbers and all that stuff. That's part of the due diligence in the franchise agreement. But do you really know what the strategic plan is for that company? Because sometimes that may have undue effects at the bottom of that food chain. And that's probably as far as I want to go on that topic right now.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's interesting you say that, right? Because I know people who it was like a family owned franchise. And all their franchisees were small or they'd been around for 15 years and they'd very, very slowly gotten to a pretty big thing. And none of them want to like work that hard. None of them want to like scale that hard, right? And so they get in and they push it, and then they're like, I need more. I need more support. I need more this. I need more that. And they're like, dude, chill. Like that's not what we do here. Like that's not how the franchise is. And then I've seen on the other end, right, where people are in these giant franchises owned by private equity, and they have cycles, and you have to know, like, is it a long-term cycle? Is it a short-term cycle? Who are they going to sell it to? Like, are they going to buy other franchises that actually compete directly, right? There's an automotive one where they own like 5 oil change. They don't care about putting all of them next to each other, right? Because they're getting royalties off of all of them. So like, yeah, and all of that's in at least a good base is in the franchise disclosure document in item 1 that, people need to go to, and then they need to read that and ask very directed questions about it and look at the history of that franchisor. And there's a lot online that you can find, especially with AI now, relatively easily. And you got to make sure, like you said, it aligns with your goals, right? If you want one franchise and you want to get to a certain place and have a lifestyle business, you probably want a small family-owned franchise. So you just got to figure out what's right for you, and you need to do your research and ask the right questions. And for people who are like, oh my God, I don't know what those questions are, again, you work with me and I know what those questions are.
Yeah. And you bring up a couple good points. So, the advancement of technology as we know it is, and everyone's hair is on fire, and the rapid development of AI and new tools and new marketing schemes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like, make sure as you're doing due diligence, you understand where the marketing comes from and what platform drives people to you. And I will, cautiously walk the rope that says you really got to know. And my advice going forward would be you want the least amount of dependence on things you can't control. The behemoth search engine that's out there has zero responsibility to tell me when they're doing a software patch, and then you get this blip on the radar and the phones don't ring for a couple of days, and you start digging and you find out, oh yeah, they just patched something, and oh yeah, we have to go back and reset this button and change this to this and that to that. And you're like, darn, man, life would be a lot easier if we didn't have such a high dependence on some of these mammoth non-contributing partners in our success or your success, right? So that's kind of a definite lesson learned that I probably didn't touch on. And in the due diligence, I truly would want to be extremely well diversified, not so dependent on things I can't control, like the internet, and that's just my biggest takeaway from 7 years of highs and lows as it relates to that stream of lead generation. You touched on a good one, and I'm going to kind of have a quick walk back to one of the classes I took in my MBA in 2018 was an M&A class, and super, interesting and understanding the world of PE and the values and markets and private equity and all these things. And one of the or two of the biggest takeaways, and I've now seen it like firsthand with people in my inner circle, is like an M&A buyout always has certain broken glass on the backside of it, and it's funny because I never thought about it until most recently, where the culture and the people are usually the most impacted by a majority of mergers and acquisitions, right? I forget the exact stat, but there's some stat that says a year after the acquisition, some greater than 50% of the original core leadership and personnel of the company that was bought out or acquired are gone. And that's kind of interesting. Like an M&A has huge impact on the people. And I never really thought about it in the world of franchising, because as I look backwards and forwards, I'm like, who are the people if you're a franchisor and you get caught up in an acquisition, you know, is it the headquarters staff? Maybe, but I'm starting to come to the realization that lessons learned from M&A and impact on culture and people in the world of franchising might actually be franchise owners, like they're the people that feel it the most at some point.
Mhm.
And I never really thought about it until very recently. And it's fascinating. And that's like one of the underlying tones of why you have to look forward. Like you better know where you're at on that cycle, 5 to 7 year typical big investment cycle. Buy, either break up and sell, or hold, build, sell at 12 times whatever you bought at, whatever those numbers are. And what's fascinating is I don't think that was part of my due diligence.
Mhm.
For you, Josh, definitely something you want to add to your repertoire of, hey, here's some things. And, this is what I know about franchisor X, going forward. It's a brand new cycle. They got brand new PE, should be stable for X number of years, et cetera. That's important, because again, different motivations.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see a lot more like investment in new technology and new marketing efforts, new vendor relationships at the beginning than you do at the end, right?
Yeah.
So for those who want to get smart on something like that, there's a book called Big Money in Franchising by Alicia Miller. Right, good book, easy read, and it that's the best resource I found to uncover these types of topics at a regular person. This isn't a book you have to have an MBA to read, right? Like anybody can read that book. So okay, cool. And so let's kind of wrap up these last 10 minutes here. Let's say you know everything you know now, right? But we rewind 5 years ago and you're starting your franchise due diligence search again, right? Walk us through like how you would, from soup to nuts, right, go about finding the right franchise for you.
That's a lot. That's a lot to unbundle. So, I mean, I can't change what I did. The due diligence process, like I said, some of the biggest lessons learned are, you know, what are the biggest sources of lead generation? How dependent are you on things and you can't control? I can't control the internet, right?
So let me interrupt you there, right? So if you can't control it, right? A lot of people say, "Hey, I'm not a hardcore salesperson, so I need online lead gen," right? So that's the Facebook and the Google, right? That's basically it. And if they decide that they don't like you, well, sucks to be you, right? So that's kind of what you're talking about. But the alternative would be like these B2B services where you're cold calling or you're cold walking in to buildings, right? And you're just like, "Hey, can I talk to the owner?" You're saying you would lean more towards that because that's within your control? Like how many calls you make that day is up to you?
To be honest, Josh, I haven't completely solved the mystery of what it would look like if I did this tomorrow. What I'm saying is it needs to be well diversified and not heavily dependent on the internet. Because,
Mhm.
and again, not getting into what search engines biggest, best, whatever. What I really mean is the advancing of technology and the number of different avenues that are quickly coming to market pretty fast. It's changing. And if you go and Josh, you buy a franchise that's all about, we get all our leads from AI, and AI is, the best thing since sliced bread. And you're like, oh, I love AI. It controls my life. And you're like, all in, push all your chips in. I'm all in. And then 6 months later, disruptive technology comes in and undercuts AI, and now it's AGI or whatever the next acronym, vocabulary is going to make a difference. And now suddenly you're like, oh my God, what do I do? My leads aren't coming in. The AI is dead, because some new technology came out. And and again, I'm not a technologist, so I'm not prescribing to have the answer. What I'm saying is you want to be well diversified in your lead generation. You want to be able to have, I would say, like one of my things of my existence is the fact that my new lead generation is not really in my control. I'm at the mercy of the tools that are out there, SEO companies and the buys and, PPC, pay per clicks, all those other things. I can't control other than throwing money at it. Right. What I would be more comfortable if I were to do this again tomorrow is, okay, that can be part of the puzzle, but what are my other parts? Because again, it's not the military retired colonel as much as, dude, you have literally an internet company tonight pushing new code out that says we're going to worm anyone that uses the word X. Suddenly, all the SEO that I've ever invested in goes away because that company said this term that's been mass populated and auto populated is no longer a valid search word. And 80% of my gains in the search space go away overnight because they chose, because they control it, to eliminate that word. Right. And now suddenly I'm like, oh my God, my business fell off. What happened? And then you start digging, and it takes you a few weeks, a couple months, and you're like, OMG, the word of the day is no longer electrician. It's electrical expert or whatever they did, because every swing-in vendor out there was using the word electrician, even though they weren't. So there's technology and software and patches that come in and be like, all right, Josh doesn't know how to spell electrician, but he owns a home service business. He's advertising as electrician to draw people to his page. And that's BS. And we're going to just scrub that. And that word goes away and falls to the bottom of this list of 1,000 words that are scrubbed and searched, whatever. And now suddenly the word that was my number one word to find me disappears. You've been erased, So that's kind of the gist of the argument. So like due diligence going forward, not just past or projected, gains, but truly understand where's the company in its life cycle, how big is it, where is it, because everything is like this. Every business has a cycle, right? Grow, stabilize, and then drop off. And where is it on that life cycle? So that's lesson number one. Lesson number two is where are the leads going to come from? And do you really have the ability to control more than you don't control? And that, to me, I'm at the mercy of the internet for the majority of my new lead generation, right? I can work repeat customers. I can build B2B. I got to get people who use these search engines to find me, and I got to pay the beast. And when the beast is upset, it just goes into its cave, shuts the door for a day or two, and you lose any phone calls. That's kind of the big lesson there. And then like what's the expertise that's going to be out there to support you? Definitely a lesson learned going back to like, hey, this business has grown, and have they grown talent and the support and the investment you alluded to earlier? Like, have they truly have an investment strategy, how they're going to overcome the impact of AI on lead generation, like that'd be huge for somebody to know going forward if you're going to invest in something that truly depends on the internet to provide you lead sources. That's 3 or 4. I think that's good for now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think part of the like if you don't want to be the one cold calling or generating leads, I mean that's our business does, right? It's a dance company, but we sell to schools and the schools sell to the kids. And so we just go and knock on doors and call them until they say yes, right? So it's totally up to us. Like our effort is our output. So you have that, then you have the online stuff, right? And then I think there's a third option, right? I mean, beyond just networking, right? That's still kind of cold calling, but it's less salesy, right? You're networking, you're getting referrals, but it's the brand. Um, and so like a lot of franchises I notice will say like, oh, we're the biggest player, like our name means something. And it's like, okay, well, there's 300 of you, but 300 isn't a brand name in America, right? Like 3,000 is a brand name in America, right? And so like it means something if it's Burger King or it's Pep Boys or these household names. But there's a lot of companies that are very very big, but nobody knows who they are, right? And like if I was selling to real estate agents, I'm just making this up, right? And everyone in the real estate agent world knew who I was. Like that's one thing. But if I sell to real estate agents, no one knows who I am, but there's 1,000 other franchisees. Well, it doesn't matter. There's 1,000 other franchisees because nobody knows who the name is. Right? So I think that's important too. Is like that's like you're almost the third pillar. Is if you don't want to do sales, you don't want to rely on the internet, you need something with a huge brand name.
Yeah, brand awareness is definitely huge. And if you can get a leg up, and that's probably one of the pros of doing the franchise thing is there should be an established recognition, logo, name, et cetera, when you buy into something, unless it's a brand new concept, obviously.
Yeah, and that's why I don't like going with new things. That's one of the reasons I should say. Okay. Is there anything that you wanna last topics you wanna hit on here before we wrap up?
No, just like I said, I think guys like Josh do a great job helping inform people, but they're not all created equal. And it's interesting you ended the conversation with realtors. And for most of us in the military, you probably dealt with realtors throughout your career. Brokers are the same way. No, do your due diligence on brokers. Make sure, that you know what their motivation is, how they get compensated, et cetera, because there's a lot of folks out there with a broker side, just like there's a lot of folks out there with a real estate side, realtor side. The reality is like 20% of that population in realty or in business brokering do 80% of the business, and just making sure that veterans or, folks that are also watching, like do due diligence before you even go down that path. A guy like Josh can make a huge difference on your life and help bring down some of the anxieties associated with the unknowns, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a lot of evil Joshes out there, and those guys aren't going to help you. And, you know, sometimes they're being, pointed or overcompensated for, hey, we got a brand new concept and extra little perk or bonus if you sell 5 this year or whatever. And now suddenly like, everyone's buying green socks shoe store or whatever, and you're like, what the heck? There's nothing behind it other than that maybe the broker's got some skin in the game or, just understanding that and finding good guys like Josh, I think definitely help.
Yeah, yeah, that's well said. There's a lot out there. And there's a lower barrier to entry for franchise brokers and real estate agents, right? To give you an idea. So yeah. And so that's a good way to kind of end on is make sure you find the right person to advise you. And if you want to do it on your own, right? Because I know a lot of people do. So if you go to learn.tracerfranchising.com, you can sign up for free for the community. And under learning, there's a course there's 2 courses that are free. One is not going to be free forever. The first 50 guys are going to be free, but it's a 5-day franchise challenge where you spend about an hour, hour and a half. You'll learn more than I think what 99% of franchise buyers know, and it's the things that they need to know to make sure they pick the right franchise. And then if you go to app.tracerfranchising.com, basically you'll get a digital version of me with videos of every stage and what questions to ask and places to store things. So that again, if you don't want to ever talk to me or anybody else, take the course, use the app, and you're going to get a lot of value, and it'll prevent you from buying franchises that I see every day people join that I know are going to fail, right? It's just not a good franchise. So that's out there. But of course, I'd rather you do speak with me, and then I can even do the matching for you, where I find, based off of my short list of all the research I've done, I say, hey, here are the 5 or 6 I think could be a good fit, and we'll go through that research process together. So that's what I do. It's free. The franchises do pay me since I'm paid like a recruiter, but I don't. There's no preferential treatment, right? I have my short list. They all pay me basically the exact same thing, and so I just want you to get a good franchise that's a right fit for you, so that you can be successful. So that's what we do here at Tracer. So Scott, thanks again for being on the show. This was a good discussion, not a typical discussion, but I think it's something that people need to hear, right? Is kind of the bigger picture strategy of franchise ownership, not always, the tactics that in the weeds that we usually talk about. So I appreciate you being here.
Awesome. Thanks for the time, Josh. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. All right. See you guys.